The moment I opened that hotel room door, everything changed and I felt a heat in my chest I'd never known before. Not heartbreak, not sorrow, but pure, searing anger. John, the man I'd trusted with my whole heart for nearly a decade, lay entangled with Emily, my maid of honor, in the very bed where I had imagined our future. I stood frozen, not from despair, but from fury pounding in my veins, shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I didn't gasp, I didn't scream. Instead, I dialed a number I'd never expected to use that day. And before the string quartet began the prelude to our vows, law enforcement was already en route. Who did I call? And why did I involve the police so instantly on our wedding morning? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. John was the heir to a successful construction company in our town. Tall, confident, with that easy smile that made people trust him instantly. Emily had been my closest friend since we were 12 years old, the one person who knew every high and low I'd ever lived through. We were supposed to stand together that day, side by side, celebrating love, loyalty, and the promise of a lifetime. But instead, they were together in a way that ripped the ground from beneath me. And here's what no one at that wedding knew. When I made that call, it wasn't to cancel the ceremony, and it wasn't to my mother in tears. It was to someone who could end everything John and Emily thought they had planned. The question is, why betray me on the very morning I was about to vow forever? What happened in the hours between that phone call and the police arrival? Was what I did driven by vengeance or by a sense of justice so sharp it cut through the years we had shared? Those answers would shatter more than just the illusion of a perfect wedding. Before that morning, my life felt like something out of a quiet, small-town fairy tale. I taught second grade at the local elementary school, the same one I'd attended as a child. My world revolved around lesson plans, field trips, and the laughter of children whose names I'd remember long after they'd moved on. My evenings were spent in the warmth of John's company, broad-shouldered, with sandy hair that caught the light, and green eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had a way of making people feel safe, like he could shoulder any burden. We met at a community fundraiser 6 years ago, and from that night on, we were inseparable. His proposal came 2 years ago, under a canopy of Christmas lights in the town square, with Emily standing just a few feet away, clapping and laughing as if she'd been the one proposed to. Emily. She was more than a friend. We'd met in middle school, survived awkward teenage years together, been each other's maid of honor in childhood games long before either of us had rings on our fingers. She was the one I called after every heartbreak, every triumph. If I had a sister, it would have been her. But in the months leading up to the wedding, there were moments, subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking, that now stand out like red flags waving in a storm. John started taking calls in the other room, saying it was just business. Emily would sometimes avoid my gaze during planning meetings, fiddling with her phone instead of laughing with me the way she used to. Once I walked into John's office late at night and found the two of them whispering. They both jumped, Emily making some excuse about helping him pick a song for the reception. I brushed it off. After all, they were both part of my inner circle. Why would I suspect anything else? My family poured their hearts into the wedding. My father practiced his speech for weeks, sometimes choking up halfway through. Guests flew in from across the country, spending money and time to be there for us. My mother had my dress altered 3 times to make sure it fit perfectly, while my little cousins learned their roles as flower girls with the kind of seriousness only children can muster. Everyone was invested. Everyone believed in the love story we had presented. But looking back now, the signs weren't just there. They were screaming at me. The morning of my wedding began exactly as I had imagined it for years. The soft hum of hair dryers, the clink of champagne glasses, the air thick with perfume, and the nervous excitement of a day that felt bigger than life itself. My bridesmaids were gathered in the suite, their laughter spilling into the hallway every time someone cracked a joke about the rehearsal dinner. Emily, my maid of honor, was supposed to be the center of it all, orchestrating the schedule with the precision of someone who knew me better than I knew myself. But somewhere between the second round of mimosas and the final touches on my hair, she disappeared. "She's probably fixing her hair," one of the girls said, waving it off. "You know Emily. She won't step out unless it's perfect." I smiled, but something in my gut shifted. An hour passed. The photographer came by for candid shots, and Emily still hadn't returned. The bustle of the morning moved on, but my mind stayed locked on her absence. Finally, I decided to find her. I slipped out of the suite, my dress still hanging untouched in its garment bag, and walked down the hall toward the guest rooms. John wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this floor. Tradition kept us apart until the moment I walked down the aisle. But as I reached the door to one of the suites, I heard it. Voices, low, playful. A woman's laughter I had heard 1,000 times before. Emily's laughter. My chest tightened. My hand rested on the doorknob. It turned without resistance, unlocked. The door swung open slowly, and in an instant the air changed. My eyes moved across the room, bare feet on the carpet, a dress tossed carelessly over a chair, a champagne glass with lipstick smeared along its rim. The world tilted. In the bed, tangled in white sheets, were John and Emily. Neither of them moved at first, as if the sight of me standing there froze them to the core. My heart didn't break. It burned. Every promise, every moment, every word they had ever spoken to me collapsed in silence. But instead of crumbling, I stood taller. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My hands trembled as I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out my phone. I dialed without hesitation, my fingers moving with the certainty of someone who already knew exactly what needed to happen. When he answered, I didn't have to explain. He just said, "Where are they?" The voice on the other end of the line belonged to my older brother, Mark. 10 years my senior, he had always been my protector. First as the big brother who wouldn't let the neighborhood boys bother me, and later as a detective in a county 2 hours away. Mark didn't waste words. When I told him I needed him at the hotel immediately, there were no questions. Only that quiet, deliberate tone he used when he knew a situation was serious. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, turned and walked out of the room without giving John or Emily the satisfaction of seeing my face crumble. I went back to the bridal suite, surrounded myself with the chaos of hairpins and makeup brushes, and pretended nothing had happened. By the time the ceremony was supposed to start, Mark had arrived. He didn't enter with fanfare. He moved like a shadow through the reception hall, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize him. We didn't need an audience for what came next. I led him down the same hallway I had walked that morning, my heels clicking against the patterned carpet. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Mark pushed the door open without knocking. John was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirt back on but still unbuttoned, his hair in disarray. Emily was by the window, arms crossed, eyes darting between us like a trapped animal. "It's not what it looks like," John started, the words falling out of his mouth too quickly. Emily added, "We were just talking. We didn't mean for you to see." But neither of them could erase what I had seen. Mark's expression didn't change. He had a way of letting silence pull the truth out of people. "Pack your things," he said, his voice low. "Both of you." There was a pause, and then he stepped aside, letting them pass without another word. Back in the reception hall, the guests were restless. Whispers curled through the air. Some said I had cold feet, others that there had been a family argument. A few even claimed they had seen John slip away with Emily earlier, their absence noted but never questioned. Half-truths floated from table to table, each one more warped than the last. I stayed near the back, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for Mark to return. When he finally did, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than I had ever seen them. And then he leaned in close and told me something that made my blood run cold. Mark's words landed like a blow to the chest. He told me that John wasn't just an unfaithful fiancé. He was a man living under a shadow far darker than I had imagined. For months, John had been under quiet investigation for embezzlement and fraud, siphoning money from his own father's construction company through a maze of falsified invoices and shell accounts. And Emily, the woman I had trusted like blood, wasn't just a willing participant in the betrayal of my heart. She was a critical part of the scheme, helping him launder the stolen funds through a boutique event planning business she had opened 2 years earlier. The so-called wedding day hookup wasn't born out of passion or even impulse. According to what Mark had learned, John had arranged to keep Emily close and compliant, to make sure she didn't break under pressure and tell the wrong person about the money trail the authorities were already tracing. Their intimacy that morning was as much about sealing an alliance as it was about betrayal. I could feel the weight of the revelation pressing against my ribs as I sat at the head table during the reception, my smile fixed like porcelain while my mind replayed every conversation, every small moment that now made an awful kind of sense. Guests sensed the tension. Laughter at nearby tables felt strained. Eyes flickered toward me and then away. The air was heavy with the unspoken, as if the entire room was holding its breath. When the band began a slow number, Mark moved in. He placed a hand on John's shoulder and leaned down to say something only he could hear. Whatever it was, it drained the color from John's face. Emily, who had been hovering at the edge of the dance floor, froze like a deer caught in headlights. Cameras began to flash as 2 uniformed officers appeared at the doorway, making their way through the tables with deliberate steps. I watched as John was pulled aside, his expression shifting from shock to anger, to something almost like resignation. Emily tried to slip out unnoticed, but another officer intercepted her before she reached the door. In that moment, betrayal stopped being just personal. It became criminal, documented in the flicker of camera bulbs and the murmur of stunned guests. The man I thought I knew was no longer just the one who had broken my heart. He was a fraud in every sense, and the woman I had called my sister had been his partner in every way that mattered. John was arrested before the cake was even rolled out. The music stopped mid-song, the band lowering their instruments as murmurs rippled through the hall. Guests craned their necks to see him being led away in handcuffs, his once pristine suit now rumpled, his eyes darting around the room in desperate calculation. Emily, still clinging to the edge of the dance floor, made one last attempt to slip away unnoticed, but she was gone from my sight before the night was over. It wasn't until 3 days later that I learned she had fled to another state, hiding with a cousin. Mark's network was wider than she realized, and by the end of the week, she too was in custody. The trial came months later, stretching through winter into the first days of spring. I took the stand, my voice steady as I recounted every detail from the morning of the wedding to the moment the officers walked through the reception doors. The prosecution played clips from our wedding video, not for romance but to show the timeline, John slipping away, Emily following minutes later, both returning with forced smiles. The jury saw more than betrayal, they saw conspiracy. Then came the final blow, delivered in private by Mark just days before the verdict. He told me that if the day had gone as John planned, he would have danced with me under the soft glow of the reception lights, kissed me for the cameras, and then quietly drained every cent from our joint account before vanishing into the night. He had set the wedding as his final alibi, a grand performance to mask his disappearance. Knowing that truth, I felt the rage and grief inside me shift into something else. Clarity. Trust, once broken, is rarely repaired. Betrayal leaves scars that no apology can touch. But silence, I realized, can be even more costly. Had I ignored what I saw that morning, I might have lost everything. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I didn't feel triumph, only relief. I walked out of that courthouse without a husband, without a best friend, but with my future intact. I had been stripped of the wedding I thought I wanted, but I had kept something far more valuable. I lost a wedding, but I saved my life. If you caught your partner like this on your wedding day, what would you do? Would you stand there in stunned silence, hoping there was some explanation that could erase what you had just seen? Would you go through with the ceremony anyway, clinging to the dream you had built together? Or would you walk away knowing that the moment you stepped out of that room, everything you thought you knew had already ended? I've heard people say they wouldn't hesitate to leave, but it's different when the betrayal stares you in the face while wearing the suit you picked out together, when the person beside them is someone you trusted with your deepest secrets. I want to know. In that moment, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear about the millionaire bride who vanished just hours before she said, "I do," leaving behind a trail of clues that still baffles investigators to this day. Subscribe so you never miss what's next, because the truth is, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that really happened.